Welcome to part 1 of session 5, where we're going to be focusing on loving kindness and compassion in relation to mindfulness. And the intention is to focus on cultivating goodwill, kindness, generosity and compassion. You begin by practicing self-compassion and loving kindness towards your self-criticisms. The goal here is to acknowledge self-critical thoughts without avoidance and to meet them with loving kindness. Then we're going to extend loving kindness to others, fostering deeper connections and shared experiences of compassion. So let's begin with reminding ourselves what is mindfulness. And this is the definition that we're using during this course, that mindfulness is paying attention on purpose, in the present moment and non-judgmentally. And we have teased out 3 specific features of this, and that is deliberately paying attention, being in our present moment, and being non-judgmental about what we observe. So let's move on and start with this particular module and its theme of loving kindness. So how might we define this loving kindness and compassion? Well, the words that come to mind are empathy, self-compassion, self-kindness, generosity, and care. And we're going to learn that sometimes we can be quite hard on ourselves, that we can be quite judgmental and critical of ourselves, and it's often just an automatic response which we've learned over many years. Our aim is to grow in capacity to meet life's challenges effectively with mindfulness, and self-compassion is proven to build the ability to handle challenges effectively. So let's move on and explore self-compassion a little further. So what is self-compassion? I guess we could think of it as warmth, as acceptance, as recognizing our common humanity, that we're not perfect, we never have been, we are very much like other people. And it's about meeting ourselves with a certain warmth instead of a self-criticism or avoidance. We're going to be learning to accept suffering is a part of our common human experience without blaming other people or without self-blame. We're going to be mindful of unpleasant emotions or sensations without over-identifying with them. And that realizing that this is not about avoidance, it's not trying to resist self-criticism, we're not suppressing it or denying it in any way. And it isn't a simplistic self-esteem boost. So let's have a look at why we might want to do this. Let's explore some of the benefits associated with self-compassion. Okay, so what are the benefits? Why should we take the trouble to learn what loving kindness is? Why should we take the time to be self-compassionate towards ourselves, as well as compassionate towards others? Well, research has shown that it increases the motivation to make amends, to improve performance in given areas of our lives, or to strengthen what we might perceive and experience as weaknesses in our behavior or our thinking, etc. It increases our growth mindset. It allows us space and time in which to want to grow, want to develop, and so on. and it encourages us to confront our mistakes without feelings of shame, without separate self-deprecation. And it enables us to sustain a certain self-confidence and sense of self-worth. So let's move on and begin with our first practical of this session. And in this practical session, we're going to be giving yourself compassion in a difficult situation. And the aim is to understand that self-compassion, what it is, and how it can affect your mind and your body. And we're going to be using a guided meditation to go through that process. So as you're aware by now, you need to give your full attention to this. Assuming you're ready to go, sit up in your upright in your chair, with your hips 2 to 3 inches above the level of your knees. Get your feet flat on the floor. Rest your hands on your lap, but don't interlock your fingers. You can close your eyes if you wish to. Otherwise, just stare softly down towards the floor. And without changing it, become aware of your breath as it rolls in and rolls out again. So let's start this process by bringing to mind a situation which is causing you worry or stress. And recall the details of this situation. What are the circumstances? Are there other people involved? What's happened or is likely to happen? And what are your desired outcomes from this situation? Acknowledge for a moment the difficulty of this situation and label any emotional sensations you discover. You can use phrases like, "This is difficult," "This is sad," "I feel anxious," and so on. Recognize that difficulty is a part of life and common to all people on this planet. Take a moment to embrace our common humanity and also the transient nature of difficult situations. Face this difficulty with openness, with kindness, with courage and compassion. Take this opportunity to offer yourself some self-kindness. Say, for instance, "May I be kind to myself in this moment." And use comforting language as if speaking to a loved one. You can optionally rest your hand on your heart and offer kindness to yourself. Breathe deeply into that kindness and slowly return attention to the present moment. Recognize your self-compassion. What does it feel like for you? And bring that self-compassion with you into the present moment. Now let that difficult situation go. This brings to an end this particular guided practice. Become aware of your feet on the floor and the chair you're sitting in. You may wish to wiggle your fingers and take 2 or 3 deep breaths. And if your eyes were closed, Open them and become aware of your environment. So let's do some reflective journaling. Get your journal and your pen ready. Once you're ready, we'll begin with, in which areas of your life can you be more forgiving? And what would you change? Or what would change if you brought more forgiveness into these areas? And you may want to pause the video for a moment while you spend time reflecting on these two questions. But we'll continue the session by having a further look, or a deeper look, at your inner critic. So we tend to be quite hard on ourselves during difficult times. We can often define or demand a level of perfection which we wouldn't expect from other people, and we can often begin to doubt the choices we have made. We can judge and criticize ourselves quite harshly. It often feels like there's an internal voice verbalizing negativity. Now we call this the inner critic, and the inner critic tends to focus on our weaknesses, on potential failures, or obstacles we've failed to overcome. It speaks negatively to us and can often be quite harsh. It points to threats. It religiously monitors our mistakes and judges the self and others. And it can often trigger other emotions such as guilt or shame. It can make us angry sometimes, or even hostile to ourselves and others. The inner critic seems to have a function of monitoring our behavior. It aims to prevent us from making mistakes in the future, and to some extent tries to actually keep us safe. So these functions, this purpose, isn't inherently actually negative. The problem is the way the inner critic evaluates our actions and how it behaves. Now consider, would you want a loved one to live with someone like your inner critic? Question whether you would want them exposed to the critical thoughts that you repeatedly face. And reflect on whether you would prefer a loved one to be met with acceptance, to be met with warmth, nurturing, and forgiveness. So in our next exercise, we're going to be identifying the inner critic and looking at ways in which to bring compassion to that subject, to that area of our lives. So, this is a little bit different in terms of a practice. It's actually a guided journaling exercise called Identifying the Inner Critic. And this is just an introduction to it. In the next slide, I'll be going through a little bit more detail as to what you need to do. But this is all about questioning what our inner critic is up to. The aim is to become aware of what our inner critic actually sounds like, and we're going to be able to recognize that the inner critic can be mistaken for concern or for caring about ourselves. And it's going to enable us to understand that the inner critic does not bring any compassion. And we're also going to be aiming to clarify the consequences of listening to the inner critic's voice. So you may want to get your journal ready. If it isn't out already, we were using it a few months ago, so it's quite possibly with you now. And we're going to move on to the exercise itself. So I'm going to give you a series of prompts, and each one is an opportunity for you to reflect and to journal on your inner critic. So the first question is, in what areas do you hear the inner critic most loudly? And what does your inner critic sound like? What does it say? And when does the inner critic motivate, inspire, or support you? And how do you think a loving friend would respond to your inner critic? And what if we replaced the inner critic with that friend? So you may want to take the opportunity to spend a little bit more time on this. This actually brings to an end the first part of session 5. So I look forward to seeing you in the second part of this session, where we'll continue to explore the theme of loving kindness.